We are going to begin in Washington, where much of the focus is now shifting from Donald Trump's second impeachment trial to President Biden's bold agenda, including his nearly $2 trillion COVID relief plan. This comes after the Senate acquitted the former president over the weekend. Only 7 Republicans joined Democrats in voting to impeach Mr. Trump for inciting an insurrection at the Capitol last month. Now, the party is facing a reckoning over how to move forward and unite. Some GOP lawmakers say that it's time to leave Mr. Trump in the past, while others argue that he is very much the party's leader.
He's mad at some folks, but I understand that. My goal is to win in 2022, to stop the most radical agenda I've seen coming out of the Democratic presidency of Joe Biden. We can't do that without Donald Trump, so he's ready to hit the trail, and I'm ready to work with him.
So Ed O'Keefe is following the impeachment vote aftermath at the White House.
Top Republicans can't agree on what's next for the GOP.
We need to unite the party. Trump plus is the way back in 2022.
We've got to move on from the cult of Donald Trump and return to the basic principles that the party's always stood for.
The former president's influence on the party was evident Saturday as the Senate voted to acquit him.
Donald John Trump, former president of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the article of impeachment.
Democrats said it wasn't the strength of the case that left impeachment managers short of the 67 votes needed to convict.
We didn't need more witnesses. We needed more senators with spines.
Compared to the first impeachment trial, the 57-43 vote was a big shift and the most bipartisan vote to convict in impeachment trial history. But still, only 7 Republicans joined all Democrats. Among them, only one, Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, is running for re-election next year. And on Saturday, the Louisiana Republican Party's executive committee censured Senator Bill Cassidy in a unanimous vote. Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell said he voted to acquit because of his belief that it was unconstitutional to impeach any former president. But he still blames Trump for sparking the violence at the Capitol last month.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
With governors and congressional elections more than a year away, some party leaders, like Stephen Bolton, head of the Chicago GOP, believe the rebuilding will begin well beyond Washington.
The Republican Party is going to start to turn more local, go back to a core Republican message, which is peace in our streets, prosperity in our homes, and liberty in our lives.
But that there are still things to learn from the former president.
The populist pulse, if you will, that he rode into the White House didn't start with him. It's still there. It was there before he ran for president, and it's still there now, and it will continue to be there. I think the important thing to do is to concentrate on what President Trump stood for as far as American policies, and try to get away from just the man.
So Ed O'Keefe is with me now from the White House to talk more about all of this. So Ed, we saw in your report, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell delivered some really critical remarks in regards to the former president. Essentially blaming him for the insurrection, but as you pointed out, he voted not to convict him. So then where does the Republican Party go from here? Prior to the final vote with this impeachment, the thinking was among some people, and certainly Democrats were suggesting, that this is a moment for the Republican Party to clearly say whether or not they want to sever ties with Donald Trump and to control or limit his influence moving forward. So that didn't happen. He was acquitted. So is the Republican Party's focus going to be more local, like we saw in your story, moving forward, looking to the next election cycle?
Well, we'll see. I mean, how much time do we have to discuss the future of the Republican Party? We could go all day on this one. But essentially, yes. I mean, the first set of big races across the country are more local in nature. There's governor's races this year in New Jersey and Virginia, where the state parties are trying to figure out who would be best to take on the Democratic contenders. There will be special elections of all sorts for Congress that may also yield some sense of whether a Trump-aligned candidate does better than somebody else. And then, of course, going into next year, Republicans will try to retake control of the House and the Senate, try to hold on to and pick up a few more state capitals as well, both the legislatures and the governorships. And they're going to continue to debate whether the way to do this is through the ideas of the party, the conservative ideas, especially fiscal conservatism, localized control of various public institutions like education, or whether it makes more sense to sort of just do it in a Trump-like way, which not only means adopting and pushing for the conservative ideas he implemented, but doing it in that more caustic way that whipped up the Republican base. So it'll be an ongoing fight for them, but certainly Republican leaders across the country of all different sorts understand wins next year are critical to maintain the viability of the party going forward.
In regards to the impeachment trial, have we heard anything from President Biden at all? We have a little bit. He said, look, while he wasn't convicted, there was no disputing the substance of the charges against his predecessor. And in a statement that they released Saturday night, he said in part that this sad chapter in our history has reminded us that democracy is fragile, that it must always be defended, that we must be ever vigilant, that violence and extremism has no place in America, and that each of us has a duty and responsibility as Americans, and especially as leaders, to defend the truth and to defeat the lies. This is how we end this uncivil war and heal the very soul of our nation, underscoring two of the inaugural and campaign themes of his, ending the uncivil war and restoring the soul of the country. Look, he was asked about it briefly last week on Friday, said he was curious to see which of his former Republican Senate colleagues might vote to convict. As we saw, there weren't that many, but he was otherwise not actively engaged in conversations with senators and not actively watching it hour by hour over the course of the 5 days of the trial. We will see how they pivot off of this here at the White House this week. The plan is to keep focused on the pandemic itself. He's planning to fly tomorrow to Wisconsin for a nationally televised town hall on another network to discuss the ongoing pandemic relief and his push for a multi-trillion-dollar COVID relief package. Thursday, he's headed to a Pfizer plant in Kalamazoo, Michigan, to check out how they're continuing to produce vials of the vaccine. Ed, Congress is now turning its attention towards President Biden's agenda now that we can put this impeachment to bed. Of course, COVID relief is sort of topping the agenda. Nothing can really get done until we could contain the virus here and offer some sort of relief. The hope is that some sort of legislation will be passed by March 14th. That's when unemployment runs out. What's the likelihood of that happening? How are things going?
All systems go for now. You say Congress is now turning its attention to this. Arguably, one half of Congress was focused on it last week. House committees were continuing to work through the details of the bill at the committee level. They're supposed to send it on up the chain this week and next for a final vote in the House, probably next week. And then it will go on to the Senate, where the hope is that it will get passed and then differences sorted out and a final version sent here, as you said, by the day unemployment benefits are set to expire, March 14th. If enacted as written, the new American Rescue Plan would extend those unemployment benefits until the end of September, increase them to $400 a week. They're working on different aspects of the price, the scope, who exactly is eligible for these things. And notably, we heard last week, this didn't get as much attention as it should have, but it'll start to get more attention again this week. Maine Senator Susan Collins, one of those Republicans close to the Democratic president, said she'd heard from him and that she and those 10 total Republican senators who had signed on to a letter suggesting they were willing to work with Democrats on COVID relief legislation are still negotiating with the White House, still trying to potentially find a way. That would suggest that the predictions that at least a handful of Republicans will ultimately vote for this legislation in the House and the Senate remain viable because at least those Republicans understand that it looks better for them politically to have at least tried and signed on to this in some way than to not have done so at all. So that could mean changes specifically to the price, the size of this. Remember, one of the things that's in the plan right now that's likely to get taken out over the course of negotiations is increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. The president himself has signaled he understands that might have to come out of it and be settled in a separate debate. But for now, all systems go, and this becomes issue number one now, again, as it probably should be for many Americans who are struggling for relief here in Washington.
A couple of other things on the agenda for the Biden administration. The White House announced an executive order yesterday establishing an Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership What can you tell us about this? What's the intention here?
Yeah, this actually reestablishes something that had been started by George W. Bush. He had opened the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, and essentially it's a liaison from the White House to the nation's churches, synagogues, mosques, somebody who's designed to reach out to faith leaders, community groups across the country, and find ways for the federal government to help them out, and vice versa. By adding neighborhood partnerships, it is also sort of designed to reach into the nation's cities, areas of the country that have felt neglected by the federal government. This, again, reestablishes something that was there during the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations, and by the Trump years had sort of been shoved over to the Department of Health and Human Services. By putting it back here at the White House, or under the White House umbrella, if not literally physically here, it's designed to show that this is something of importance to the president and to religious and community groups across the country.
Also, President Biden's going to be taking part in the virtual G7 meeting with world leaders Friday. I expect that the message will be something along the lines of, new administration, America's back.
Yeah, this is a high-level Zoom meeting. Really only 7 invited guests to this one. Let's see if they can figure out the mute button. The G7 leadership cycles to different countries every so often. The United Kingdom is up right now. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced on Face the Nation yesterday that he would be hosting this meeting virtually this coming Friday. It is essentially designed to talk about how the world is responding to the pandemic and how the world's most advanced economies should be working together to ensure that not only their countries, but of course the rest of the world is equitably dealing with the pandemic, vaccine distribution, economic regrowth, and whatnot. This will be his first official diplomatic engagement with world leaders, at least in a public setting, even though it's virtual, since he took office. And yes, Anne-Marie, the White House points out that to some extent the United States is back, among other things, rejoining the World Health Organization, and he's been making calls to world leaders primarily to discuss the response to the pandemic, and it will be the subject of their conversations later this week.
You know, the mute button, hopefully they have a handle on that. It's the kitty cat filter that I'm most concerned about. Hopefully that has been disabled as well.
That would be something.
Ed, thank you so much. Yeah, that would be great, actually. Thanks a lot, Ed.
Take care.